Mirna. I'll share a little bit more about myself as well in a minute. I know now you're probably at this place, which is like, I don't know what this is about. I'm kind of excited because I like the topic, but I don't know yet what's going to happen. So I want to address that first. What we're going to talk about is kind of looking into how would you want participants at your workshop or event to feel. Now, I know we have people here probably from a bit different background and roles. I mostly work with trainers in this topic and how emotions are useful for workshops you do or trainings or facilitation you do. So that is the angle from which I'll be sharing stuff and talking about stuff. However, if that's not your position or your role, do adapt any questions we explore to your situation. So you can think from position of a learner, which emotions are useful for you as a learner, how can you adjust that more, work with your own emotion, or somebody managing the environment and the group and the team and so on. So feel free to adapt that. I will keep talking about kind of training in workshop context, but this is definitely for you to adapt. And we really want to look into how do emotions impact active participation, because that's what in learning is hugely important. How can we more engage people by leveraging and using emotions? But then also how do emotions impact learning itself? So what is the connection from science of learning, from neuroscience between learning and emotions, and which emotions are good for learning, which emotions are sabotaging learning, and how can we work with that? That is overarching the theme we are playing with and the theme we are exploring. More specifically, how we're going to split the time. I will start with a little intro. Maybe 10 minutes, shouldn't be longer than that. Just giving you some framework around how we can think about emotions in the context of learning. And this intro will more serve as a foundation for the exercise we'll do then. So our second part will then be trying out one of the tools and approaches in working with emotion in practice. And how we're going to do that? You're going to do it individually first. You will need a sheet of paper or a journal or something to write for that. So you will do the exercise individually first, and then you'll jump into the breakouts of 4, maybe 5, in which you will also share with others what did you come up with. Usually that comes up with quite interesting insights on how we approach some things in a similar way, but also what are some of the differences in our approach and ideas we would never get. So that can be really interesting sharing. And then after the breakouts, we'll just see who wants to share something with the bigger group as well. You have a chance for that. Breakouts will be the only part, and they will be in around 20 minutes, half an hour. They'll be the only part where I will ask you to really be active and support the rest of your group, because it won't be fun if half of the people in breakouts are not properly there. For the rest, I don't mind if you're a little bit on and off. You'll get the recording as well anyway. So it's totally up to you how much you want to be active or kind of half listen and so on. Just for breakouts, please do, and the active exercise, please do invest your attention and energy there, because then it will be more valuable for everyone. And then in the end, I'll share a bit of a theory. Basically, I'll go through 5 let's say facts or groups of facts from science of learning about how different emotions impact learning. So these will be more like tips and tricks and specific things to keep in mind when you're thinking about your learning process and how to incorporate emotion. And that part, again, will be recorded as well, so this theory can come back to. But the ones who are attending live today, I would most invite you to explore this part where we discuss more, where you share in breakouts more as well, and also in the big group, because that's something you can't get after. And everything else from theory you can always come back to as you wish. Just a little bit about me, so you know the angle I'm coming from. My name is Mirna. In Croatian, it means peaceful, calm, and quiet. Total miss out. I work primarily as a trainer, also as a coach and speaker, but primarily as a trainer, meaning small groups, highly interactive, experiential learning, usually a bit longer courses, stretched over time, to practice and explore different skills and tools from 2 areas. One, well-being, so positive psychology, resilience, topics related to flourishing and well-being. And second thing, to train the trainer. So any skills related to designing impactful educational experience, impactful learning, from foundational train the trainers to more advanced skills for trainers, as is this one. I do have a background as an engineer. That was one of my kind of multitasking period when I did both training and engineering. And that is one thing that quite impacted my style as a training, in sense, I really want to look into things that I share to be science-based as much as we can, and also to be practical and really look for how can we apply that, how can it be useful in your real life. So this topic as well emerged as one of the problems and solutions that showed up as I worked with train the trainers. That seemed to be a topic that is way overlooked too often in training. So when we think about successful learning experience, when we think about emotions in learning, very often we will just stay with this idea, oh, my participants should be happy, they should be engaged, they should have fun. And we don't really go deeper than that so often. But if we think about training in more goal-oriented approach, then we see that diversity of emotions, different intensities, different flavors can have quite a big impact on how learning happens. And that's something we can truly use and leverage as a tool, but also notice as a potential trap that can break our process. These conversations that started on Train the Trainers usually also ended up being a bit overwhelming because there is a lot under this topic for new trainers to go deep into. And that's how this topic was born as a separate virtual course that I also deliver, where I work with trainers who are doing workshops and trainings already and they want to explore this topic deeper. Now, not to keep it just closed in the community of people who attend the course, I also wrote an ebook, and I would invite you, if you really want to look for references and science side of things and more facts than we covered today, do grab the ebook. I will share the link later in chat as well. It's free, and there I really outlined the dry science of what works, what doesn't, what do we need to know. So if today will not be enough for you, these are two places you can join us. One is the course, the other one is the ebook to start dive more into the theory and so on. So the first thing we want to keep in mind is having more intentionality with emotions in facilitation. And with this time, I do want to check out what did you write in chat, because intentionality starts with, hey, what emotions do I want to be present in my learning room? What emotions do I want to feel or create for others within learning environment? So you mentioned some quite nice ones. You mentioned you want people to be happy, you want them to be intrigued. Oh, love that one. You want them to be inspired, curious. One more, inspired. More curiosity, that's great. That's one of the best ones. So, but also being present, very important. Enlightened, feeling engaged, feeling enthusiastic, surprised and motivated, joyful, open. Wow, cool, very cool. Cool, so many different ones. I will notice you mentioned all the positive ones. We shall talk about that a little bit later. Should they always be positive and always positive, or is there also space for uncomfortable emotion? But I think the ones you mentioned are super cool starting point. Now, first, very briefly, why would we care about emotions in context of learning in the first place? Very briefly, there are three things that are related to our emotions and emotional engagement. One is our motivation. If I feel more positive emotions, and which emotions I feel will impact how motivated I am to get engaged with the process, to actually do the active tasks, to actually think actively. The second thing is how we think and how we process things is heavily impacted by emotion. Example, presence was a great one example for that. If we are more present and mindful, we can be in more reflective mode. We can go in deeper insights and reflections. But if we are very under high and intense emotion, we cannot be very reflective and slowly explore the topic. We have to engage in different ways. So how we feel shapes and impacts how we engaged in terms of thinking process and cognitive processes as well. And then the third aspect is also memory, maybe even the most important one. Every memory we have what became a memory because it was related with some sort of emotion. So emotions frame our memories, emotions shape how we do recalling and remembering of things. So in that sense, if there is no emotion, literally there is no learning. So we want to think from emotions. How can I use them for people to be more motivated? How can I use them for them to engage in more active thinking? And also with memory. I see a question in chat. I'll answer it when I go through these few intro slides and before we jump into the exercise. So one of the ways in which we can use and I would say the quickest shortcut that you can start using more thinking about emotions right now is by simply taking the workshop design or the learning plan that you have and then doing a little mental walk through them. So that would be the first quickest approach without diving very deep into the tools, without thinking very broadly and just about emotions, and still being able to focus on your design, on your content, on your plan, but involving emotions a little bit. And it goes simply like this. You do your training design, you always do it, or workshop or whatever it is. And then you mentally walk through it, putting yourself in your participant's shoes. So kind of saying, okay, if I would come to this workshop, how would I feel? How would I likely feel at the beginning of it? Do take into account time of the day, the background of the participant, the topic, and so on. How might they feel when they show up? And with all the different activities and things that happen, how might they feel throughout? And you just want to see, does that make sense? Is there a sudden disruption? Is there some boredom because all the emotions are kind of similar? Are they bits that are too long so they become boring? Are they too sudden transitions where you stress them a bit and then you expect they're really excited and joyful after that? So just noticing what might be the broken bits and how can you maybe improve them a little bit. And for each step in that kind of journey and design, you might want to ask, which intensity would I want them to have here in terms of emotion? Should this be like really, build up part, which is very intense, or more like easygoing where they have chance to relax and so on? But then also, what about negative? Negative is not the most fortunate name. Usually we prefer to call them uncomfortable, but usually in psychology and literature, you will find the naming negative emotions, but let's call them uncomfortable. So any uncomfortable emotions, are they also welcome? Should they feel stressed, challenged, anxious, insecure? Is there space for that? In which parts of my training is that okay? In which part it's not? Is there some place where I'm in danger that this shows up more than I would want to? Or maybe do I need more of it? And then the last one, are emotions, this is really important one, I'll mention it probably several times. Is there enough of diversity of emotions in my flow? Or am I just playing, into curiosity for 3 hours or into engagement or enthusiasm for 3 hours? Not very realistic and not very memorable. So I do want to play in diversity of emotions. So I want to notice that in my flow as well. Now, if you want to go a bit more hardcore, goal-oriented, really focused on emotion, then alternative approach would be taking it a step further, starting with what do I wish to create as emotional experience? And this is the step we will be playing with today in the active task. So what do you wish to create? How do you want that flow to look like? So writing down which emotions would you want them to experience for different parts of the design. And then the second step would be, how will you create this? What are some tips, tools, techniques? We will not go very deep into this for sake of time. That is quite limited, but looking into, and that's something where many of you have many answers already as well when you ask the question. How can I make them hear more, whatever it is, excited, curious, focused, or whatnot? So how will I create it? And then also the third step that's quite important is connecting it with reality. So seeing, is that realistic? I'm expecting them to be excited and our training is at 9 p.m. and they had a very full working day. I'm expecting them to be intensely excited. So I want to hear in the third step, I want to connect. What if they come with very different state? If they come stressed, if they come tired, how will I still connect my plan with their state of the moment? So this is a little bit more, I would say, stronger design in terms of really thinking about emotion and really designing for it. I don't think we need to do that every time, but that's one of the options how we can access it. But that mental journey and walkthrough through design that already exists is, I think, more than enough to become aware of some pitfalls and to, let's say, make session better by incorporating more. Now, one more thing I wanted to address is related to mindset when we work with emotions in learning. It's really important because the last slide I explained very goal-oriented. Let's do it this way. So I want to just also clarify that this is not about over-managing the emotions and micromanaging and over-controlling, not at all. Here we are just building more awareness, more intentionality. We want to notice more how emotions impact our learning process. And then we can see how can we leverage that to make it better and stronger. And also maybe what are some of the traps they might sabotage it a little bit. But that's, so we don't want to go like, yeah, they have to feel like this. We just want to go, which state maybe will be a bit more useful for them to learn deeper. With that in mind, I do want to put a few small disclaimers, and then I'll answer the question from chat, and then I will move to the exercise. So first of all, you can't really know how will they feel. We're building some plan, we're building some intentions. The point is not to rigidly stick with that plan, but to also incorporate the reality of the group and so on, but still to have some ideas where we want to take them. And of course, the main question is always not, how do I want them to feel because that's fun, or I like them to feel that way, but really, how is it beneficial? Emotions that I think they will naturally have in this situation, are they beneficial for their learning process? How can I fine-tune it a bit that they're more beneficial for their learning process? And when you ask those questions, you will notice that in many parts of our agenda, this happens naturally already, that they go in the right state, that our activity design already creates the right emotions and beneficial emotions in that moment. But thinking with this in mind will also give us some options to make it stronger and help us avoid some traps where it can get broken. And the last thing to keep in mind is that we always want to look this alignment, not what is the emotion, but how is emotion aligned to activity I'm doing? Which emotions are good to keep them engaged in this specific activity? But then also for their motivation, what is the impact? For their participation, do I want them to be very outgoing and step into everything? Or is there a period where they should be more reflective? What type of participation is most beneficial? And then, of course, ultimately for learning, for memory, for attention, for mental processing. These are the checklists we want to check. If they're in this emotion, will they go in the right direction of activity? With this specific activity, will they be motivated? Will they want to participate in an optimal way? And will this be good for their learning? So with this in mind, I wanted us to play with one active exercise a little bit, but let me just check the questions. So yes, you will get the presentation after the recording as well, all sent by Stefan. So that's coming through him. And about the technical training. So I would not go deep into this question right now. With technical training, because then we'll get far. But I would say that technical training is still a place where we want to think about emotions and keep emotions in mind. However, maybe those emotions won't be very intense, and maybe we won't shoot for creativity, openness, perkiness, joy, or whatnot. Maybe we will look for emotions which are focused, curious, goal-oriented, like curious about the solution. There was one really good one mentioned, intrigued, something like that. So we do want to think, but I would say with technical training, one thing that really can impact emotional a lot is the relevance, because people who attended will usually know if and in which way it's relevant for them, for their career and for their everyday work. And that will drive the motivation and emotions very often. But I'm happy to also come back to this question deeper at the very end when we go through all the tips and maybe look into which tips are more or less applicable to that one. So if that's going to be necessary, Richardson, just remind me at the end. Cool. So let's put it in practice. Let's play with it a little bit. I will give you a task and an example, a case study, but you're very welcome to adapt it also more to your scenario. So I will invite you to take a design that you have in mind for some workshop that you've been doing or event that's ideally around 2 hours long. Working with longer will be tough to manage. So try to think, do you have one? I will offer one as well and give you one as an example. But if you have one you're doing that you want to work with as an example, that's perfect as well. So we'll take first one example of workshop you're doing. And again, if you're not a trainer, if you're not doing workshops, you can think of a meeting that you are guiding that's 2 hours long, or you can think about you as a participant in a 2-hour-long workshop. That works too. And then I'll ask you to draw on a little piece of paper, sort of a chart, how would the flow of emotions in this case look like? And I'll give you a few more instructions how to go about it. So the best way to start is by setting a timeline. So drawing a little line on which you put 0 and 2 hours and few timestamps in between. The timestamps in between shouldn't be regular, like every 10 minutes or every half an hour. Instead, they should be the significant moments when something interesting is happening, like when you change the activity, when the new topic is open, so emotionally relevant transitions in a way. And then after that, you can, the way I would suggest to do it, but you're welcome to also do it in any way that works for you, to also then draw the vertical side of that chart. And on that one, to mark from 1 to 10. And that will be your intensity or energy level. Intensity of emotion often translates to energy level. And I will ask you then to think, how in this 2-hour design would a flow of energy and emotions of your participants look like? So you can draw it starting by energy, just drawing points. First, there'll be a this energy, later there'll be a this energy, later there'll be at whatever energy level. And then next to the point, so you should have points that mark what will be their energy level at different places in the timeline. And then connecting those dots with certain flow. So you see how that curve will look like. And then next to the points, I will repeat the summary of instructions. Next to the points, you want to write down a couple of main emotions you're expecting to happen here. Now, let me give you the example of the case study or exercise, because then I can explain a little bit better the instructions. I will give you then 10 minutes on your own to work on this. Okay, so we have it like this. We will play with an example on presentation skills training. You have a workshop and it's 2 hours long on presentation skills. I put the instructions in chat as well. Again, you can take another example that's more relevant for you, feel free. And you can work with presentation skills example as a trainer in that workshop. That's a little bit better, but also as a participant on that workshop. That totally works. And then just drawing kind of, you know, and let's say I wrote the whole kind of very brief outline. We'll take 15 minutes for get to know and expectations. Then we'll brainstorm for 10 minutes what are the main skills related. Then for 5 minutes, they will reflect what are their areas to focus and their priorities in their skills. And then they'll have a little active exercise. Well, they have 20 minutes to prepare and then 3 minutes per person to present. And then they'll get feedback from themselves and the trainer and others. And after that, they'll just reflect a bit what were their main learnings, and we will close it with sharing their action points or something like that. And again, exact design does not matter. I just wanted to give you some specific ideas here, so it helps you think which emotions would be good here. You're welcome to work on a different example. But then for this example, you would put on the timeline, on the lower bit, these 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and so on, where different things happen, like active presentation or whatnot. And then above that, you would draw what do you think their energy would be and write down a few main emotions in that period. Yes, exactly. There is no timeline because I want to leave this for you to do the timeline in the way you want. I'm suggesting how I might do it, but I want you to really do it in a way, if you would be drawing the flow of emotions for your workshops, how would it look like? So there is no template to it. It's really up to you how you want to draw it, how you want to represent it. If you don't want to draw it as a curve, you can also just write the main emotions next to each of these bits. But it's nicer if you can see the flow of energy. It will give you more insight. So try to play with also energy and emotions. Are there any questions? Is the task clear enough, or are there any questions? I see a couple of thumbs. If you have questions, feel free to unmute and share. More on the logistics of the task, not anything else. Okay, if you're unsure of anything, just do it the best way you would do it if you had to do it for your workshop now, because then in breakouts, you will also discuss different approaches and different styles of doing it. I will, though, ask you to draw it. It can be on a paper, but plan that you will show it to someone on the camera in the breakouts. So make sure that you don't write too very, very small and that it's kind of visible and that you can actually share it. We'll take 10 minutes for this. I will shut up for these 10 minutes. I'll just give you 2 minutes warning at the end. We'll take 10 minutes to draw the individual curves, and then we'll split in breakouts and we'll share there. So if you also have any questions or thoughts how to go about it, just capture those. You can also discuss them in the breakouts or with everyone later. Okay, 10 minutes to play with that. So we are around halfway in with the time now. You still have 5 minutes to draw down some ideas. Okay, 2 more minutes. Remember to also capture any questions or dilemmas, because then you can ask the group what they think about it. Okay, what are we going to do now? We're going to jump in the breakouts in groups of 4, and you will have 20 minutes to share any insights or questions. It's totally up to you how you want to do that, meaning maybe one person starts sharing and maybe you stay discussing their scenario the whole 20 minutes, or maybe you decide you want to be fair and all 4 have 5 minutes each to share with any questions. That's totally up to you. I will invite you to really use the time in a way that you feel it's useful for you, so that you ask questions from the group that were your dilemmas, that you really kind of don't be shy, use the time. And then after you're back, if there will be some questions or things you want to share, we'll also use a little bit of time for that. But yeah, do use the group. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I hope that was useful and insightful. I think it's even though I'll also share still some tips and tricks from this research side, but this is really what you can see where your gaps are and which are your blind spots maybe. So I hope you managed to get some ideas from others. I will ask you for whoever wants to share just a little bit of insights or questions from your group, but we will not stay with that long, like maybe 6-7 minutes. So at 1:05, we are going to start still the theory bit to make sure we manage to cover the 5 tips for that as well. So if anyone feels like you want to share something, or I see one question in chat already, but I'll let you speak first if you want, and then I'll come back to the question. So feel free to just unmute and jump in, or raise the hand, the virtual hand, or share in chat as well. So anyone who wants to share some of the insights from your group. I'll just ask you to keep it short, like, a minute to one specific idea or insight, so we don't get diverged for too long. Let's see everyone now. Let me see. Okay. You can also wave at me in the video if you feel like speaking up. Okay, I see Doug waving. Go, Doug.
Yeah, I guess one of our big takeaways where we wanted to remove some of the kind of additional work people feel like they get from workshops, like you come in and I have to change something big or do something that's going to mean more work for me. So it was a lot around what are the 1% actionable changes we spoke about to alleviate some of the kind of like frustration that might come with training. But then also like thinking how we can dial up curiosity by like 15%. So it's very much like small, tiny wins were kind of like the main theme that I had within the awesome people I was talking to.
Cool, love that. So kind of integrative approach, just adding on a little bit and keep on adding a little bit. Cool, very cool. Because then I think one of my concerns with this topic is that sometimes it becomes one element too much, because you think of your content, you think of your participants, you think about participation, about time management, about the design, about everything else, right? And then emotions can become, another pressure point. So it's really cool to actually chunk it down like this and think just what is the little thing we can keep on doing. Cool, thanks, Doug, for that. Cool. Anyone else ready to share? Cool. I see hand by Giuseppe. Go, Giuseppe.
Yeah, while we were discussing, I think it was interesting when Vesna mentioned. So we drew the line for the session that we delivered and how they felt, And she wondered if we ever did the same for the trainer, which I thought it was really interesting, the emotions we as trainers go through. So it's not something I was that ready to answer on the spot, but it's something nice to think about. And then I found interesting that Doug mentioned how to find ways to lower the frustration in session with doing little changes, which is very interesting. Because in the example that I gave in the group, instead I was trying to raise it to a point. It was a facilitation session, and we started doing a very bad facilitation where people felt frustrated about it. And then this was the way to then showcase, okay, so this session is about facilitation, and what it is was planned. Now let's talk about how to fix the bad feelings that you have now that came from bad facilitation with a good one. So yeah, a bit of an opposition with well, Doug tried to reduce it in that specific example. I tried to raise it to the roof, but it was for learning purposes, of course. It was not sadistic, and it worked. So well, happy with it.
As long as it was intentional, it's good.
It totally was.
Cool. Or sometimes you can also just say after, this was intentional, so we could all learn. Cool. Okay. Cool. Yeah. Love the point on the trainer's side. And I think maybe also a shortcut there, not to go necessarily through the chart and think about all the steps, but we could also just ask a question: which of the parts in my design of a workshop is one that's a danger for me to get tired or stressed or anything else? So I could just kind of look for high peaks in my emotion on, you know, which is the one I'm excited about and which is the one that is stressing me, if I don't want to like spend the time on going really detailed. Cool. I think that was a very actual topic when we move more to virtual training, that many trainers were like, but I don't like it anymore. How do I motivate myself? So interesting one to play with. Cool. Thanks, Giuseppe. Okay. Anyone else? Thoughts to add?
For me, so it was interesting to think in which emotion I want my participants to be when they are reflecting. So, and then I realized first I thought, yeah, when they're sharing in pairs, reflecting, it's like a bit higher emotion intensity, but actually maybe it's not really true. So I'm actually curious also, Mirna, what do you think? And others, if they have something to add.
It's gonna be in tip number 4.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Not totally, but a little bit. I would say, though, one thing that I won't mention there is also that this can be a little bit individual, because I would say in general for reflection, a bit lower calm energy and emotion is good, but it's evening hours, or if it's somebody who needs to be a little bit physically moving and so on, that's something that I would consider also adapting a little bit. But in general, it would be more on the calmer side. But I will share more on that in the 4th one. Cool.
Okay.
Cool question.
During our conversation, Ivana, on that, we kind of talked about when is it appropriate to do the emotional gut punch as well. Like, I know we often talk about wanting to get the trajectory up, but some of our questions, we wanted to bring people down to reality or make people think, in a very like emotional way. So we talked about kind of the opposite of the positive side of that journey.
Cool. Love that. Yeah, that's going to make it memorable, not usually, whatever it is, and motivation potentially. But with that, I love the expression emotional gut punch. We called it the slap, the emotional slap. But with that, you really want to think also how you pick up from there, because you can lose rapport with people there, right? And they can kind of detach from the topic. So that's important, the pick up bit. And of course, you never close with that. That's the only rule of thumb. You don't close with a big shock. Bye. But we always want to think kind of debriefing it. Okay, cool. Let me still just check the question in chat, and then I'll move finally also to giving you a bit of oh, I see also a nice comment. Giuseppe says, Svenja mentioned to circle the most impactful emotion. I think this is also interesting, as you can think from there where to go and how it impacts learning. Cool. Yeah, the most impactful, the biggest intensity is always most memorable as well in a way. But we'll talk about intensity in a bit as well. Thanks, Giuseppe, for sharing. Okay, I see question from Thais, which says, any insight on how to create a safe environment in which participants can feel an uncomfortable emotion? And then I see answer from Sophie. I've seen trust contract in the past where everyone agree some psychological safety rules they will all follow. We tend to leave them visible at all time. Cool. So I will not go into this question deep because then we will have no time for anything else more on the emotions. I will just say that with safety, the most important advice I can give is to keep on deepening and being very careful about not going too deep too fast. So while we are having colorful metaphors like emotional gut punch, I can name one more. It's called gradual vulnerability, or you can also call it emotional striptease. Basically saying you should not come and push them in very deep and deep need for safety very fast, but you really want to build it gradually by starting by sharing something that's easier for people to share, and then just deepening that conversation with things that are a bit more difficult and a little bit more maybe personal or deeper. So this it's much worse if you come in too deep too fast, because then people close off, than if you go a little bit too slow in comparison to optimal pace of deepening the safety. So with that, we want to always play safe, but we do always want to keep in mind that we need to keep on deepening it in that gradual way and not just running in the same level. So I think that's one tip I can give, but I will not go deeper because then we will get quite far. Okay, cool. I still see from Sophie, our conversation was focusing quite a bit on energy level. Cool. And we discussed how we'd want people not to have too much intensity when reflecting and high intensity when you want people to go out and do something cool. So kind of energy level, yes, the flow is always up and down. It should never be very high for very long because that's exhausting and it's difficult for attention. But then also if we keep them low, they won't be so engaged. Okay, let me still share with you what I promised on the 5 bits. And this is what I was also saying, that you can find more in the ebook, and you will also have the recording. So I'm posting the links also to the course and ebook in the chat. You can find there more also about references and so on, because I won't be mentioning where exactly this is coming from. Or more talk about the practical side. What do we know about emotional learning and what does it mean? So first one, I'll go through 5, then I'll see if there's some questions. So first one, this one is, I would say, the most foundational one. And it basically says, what is the flavor of emotion we want to have? What is intensity? And what kind of balance do we want to have? And you kind of mentioned all of this. I just want to bring it together. That's also what the research says. And it says, on one side, we want to keep in mind which specific emotion will serve the learning best. I will share more about this in other tips. So there are emotions that are better for learning, and there are the ones that are less good for learning. And we want to keep that in mind. In general, emotions that are best for learning are moderate intensity of positive emotions. Positive meaning enjoyable. That is very generalized. So it really depends on our goal, but very generalized, moderate intensity of positive emotions. If it's too intense, it's hard to keep focus. And also if they're uncomfortable, that can also be distractive. But of course, we can use these other bits as well. But overall, in very general, we want to play with moderate positive, right? Moderate means that intense emotions can be on one side distracting. They don't help us think clearly. And on the other side, if we have a longer workshop, then intense emotions are not sustainable. We cannot keep people in an intense, heightened emotional state for very long, because by end they will just be exhausted. So we want to have peaks of intensity when we really want to make an impact, an imprint, a stronger memory, but we don't want to keep like level 10 out of 10 all the time. Or even, I would say, when we talk about 1 to 10 for energy levels, usually we want to keep people around 6 to 7. Below 5 is like too low, they're not so engaged. Above 8 is kind of rough and intense and hard to maintain. So we want to aim for that sweet spot, 6, 7, maybe 8 a bit, with maybe occasional little spike, right? And potential dip after lunch. And that usually happens with energy and emotion. And then the really important thing is the balance. I mentioned this at the beginning, that one thing that creates re-engagement is diversity of emotion. So even though one of the best emotions for learning is curiosity, just keeping them curious for 2 hours or 3 hours, that doesn't give you moments of insights that are memorable, because it's too flat, it's too similar throughout. So we really want to play into curiosity to heighten it in moments when the most important insight is about to happen, versus keeping curiosity at high level the whole time. So we want to play into that diversity. So if you want to think foundations, this slide, this tip is the most important thing to keep in mind. Playing with moderation, with occasional little peaks of intensity, keeping it balanced, and keeping really in mind which emotions serve this specific process. So connecting it with specific outcome we want. Now, in terms of positive emotion, there is a research also that positive emotions, and you can find more about that in the ebook, I don't want to go in quotes and so on, but that positive emotions positively impact learning strategies. So the way we learn, the way we approach learning is positively impacted by us feeling comfortable, positive, and so on. Now, there is more to that, not just from learning. There is also bits of research from positive psychology. Maybe you know this theory, it's called broaden and build theory. And that's a theory that's looking into, and that's like a bunch of different research. One researcher, Barbara Fredrickson, worked on this for like 20 years on these related topics. So a lot of different bits there. But her main first question was, how do positive emotions impact us? And what is the role, the emotional, the evolutionary role of positive emotions? And she realized from that research, or came up with a conclusion and with a theory that says that positive emotions basically broaden our perception, meaning makes us more open, more creative, more curious, more seeking for options, more seeking for patterns and connections, which are all good things for learning, right? And they also help us build our resources. So they make us healthier, they strengthen our connections, they strengthen our resilience. So in a way, they build more capacity, which again, translates as a good thing for learning. But the most important thing here is recognizing this, that when we are positive, we are more focused on big picture. We're more open. We see connections more. So you can look it up under that name, broaden and build, if you want to discover more. But the point is, keep people in positive emotions, they'll be open. Keep them in more stressed emotions, they'll be in tunnel vision. They will be in sequential, step-by-step focus versus open and broad. Now, if we look into the specific positive emotions that are most impactful for learning, it's feeling interested, like I'm interested in this, feeling curious, and also surprise and novelty. The best attention getter that exists is element of surprise and novelty. That's what our brain is really wired for, to look for, to focus on. So that's something we might want to leverage. I would say, because these emotions are most impactful and the best, that does not mean we should always aim for that. Instead, that means we should use them as a superpower in most important bits of learning and of our workshop. So in general, we want to think in terms of positive emotions and activating emotions. I will clarify later what it means to have them activating in tip number 4. Now, on those emotional gut punches, very commonly neglected thing is uncomfortable emotion in workshops. Very often we focus too much as a trainers, especially if we don't think about it much, but we go by default. We focus on wanting to make everyone comfortable and safe, and we want to have them feel good, but we then don't necessarily go into, hey, should we challenge them a little bit more as well? And then we should recognize that there is definitely also space for uncomfortable emotion in the training room, especially some. Specifically, really good ones are feeling challenged, feeling confused, I'll clarify that, and also feeling of frustration. These are some emotions that we can leverage and use, and in a good way. Why confusion? Because confusion means that we are processing something that's difficult for us to comprehend. So of course, confusion because nothing is clear is not a good thing, but confusion because the task is simply too complex at this moment and we need time to figure it out. And then having that confusion resolved and having positive feelings of resolution will be very memorable to us. If we step into a task and if we do it wrong, we will remember, and then we realize what was wrong about it, right? And how to do it better. We'll remember that much better than if we practice doing the task well in the right way, right? Similar with frustration. Frustration simply means that for a moment, challenge is too high, that we will kind of push them a little bit or that they cannot resolve it. And that again can be a good state as long as we resolve it. And then that resolution, that relief in resolution makes it more memorable. So what we want to do in terms of uncomfortable emotion is think in terms of tasks or problems that we can design that are stretching just above the current skill level of our participant or comfort level, right? So we don't want to stretch over there that they're in panic zone, of course, but we do want to stretch to make things difficult. Otherwise, they didn't learn a lot. They learned very little if we didn't actually stretch them. So here we want to think, are there some uncomfortable emotions in my design? And if not, where maybe there is more space for these? And we don't want to shy away from them. I very much agree with comment in chat from before. For this, we do need to build some level of psychological safety. Which level can really depend on how high the risk is, how high the social risk is that they'll get embarrassed or whatnot, and how big of a challenge it is and what the topic is. So it doesn't have to always be the same. Sometimes we need to build a really strong one, and sometimes not so much. Now, number 4, and that one, I mentioned it before. If you ever build up some discomfort, make sure to resolve it and to allow space to process that discomfort after and not just kind of interrupt it and move on to something else. So we never want to do that at the end. Okay, number 4, very related to the question of reflection. This is also about the energy footprint of emotion. And here the question that we can always ask for every emotion, being it that we have a spot in the agenda where we are not sure which emotion we want to play with, or that we have an emotion and we want to think what is the impact of that emotion. But the question is always, is this emotion activating emotion or calming emotion? And when we think like this, we can get 4 groups of emotions. We can have emotions that are pleasant and emotions that are unpleasant. And then we can have emotions that are activating, which means they make us want to step out, engage actively, do something. Often they're also more on the extroverted side of emotion, like I want to engage with people as well, or with the task, or with behavior. So these are emotions that motivate me to do. We call them activating. Or they can be deactivating. Deactivating means they make me step back, maybe to process, maybe to reflect, maybe to just have a calmer moment after a moment of stress. But in a way, deactivating emotions called me more to close in and stay in my space and not to engage very actively. When we think about emotions like that, we can have 4 quadrants. One is the one where emotions are high energy and pleasant. And that's things like feeling enthusiastic. These are just some examples. There is much longer list for each, right? But it can be feeling enthusiastic, excited, fearless, positively challenged, something where we are motivated about that challenge. Maybe proud, like in this more active way, confident or amused, having fun, joyful, and so on. So with activating one, I think these are the emotions where in training, very often we focus on those. And we as a trainer feel good when participants are like that, because then we see literally in their behavior, their engagement, because they're more loud, they're more active, they're more behaving it, right? But because of that, sometimes we neglect the lower energy side. Now, while we're still talking about the activating ones, we want to also recognize the dark side of activating ones. And that is the negative, unpleasant emotions, which makes us want to act. And this can be anger, it can be fear. Fear can act both ways, that we step back or, fight or flight in a way, right? But then it can be anxiety, which again, anxiety can be a bit of both ways. Sometimes we'll want to engage, sometimes we'll want to more pull back. Or hate, defensiveness, defiance, spitefulness, frustration that we want to resolve, that we have a need to resolve. Maybe active disgust, we want to tackle something and fix it. Or nervousness when we need to maybe present or something like that. So these high activating unpleasant emotions. Again, we might want to have them in the workshop, but for moments. We don't want to have them overarching, right? And we don't want to maybe have all of them, but a bit of anxiety or nervousness, if they have a task, for example, to present or to do something difficult, can be a good thing, right? And then when we move to the quieter side, when we think of positive emotions on the deactivating side, these are probably ones that in training can be quite neglected. And these are the ones that in terms of reflection can be one of the best baseline. And that can be feeling inspired, but not like I need to do it now, but like, oh, this was cool. I got an idea, right? This inspires me in a way. Feeling connected with the topic or with my intention or with others in the group. Feeling engaged, not necessarily in behavior, but like, oh, this is interesting. I'm sitting back. In my head, I'm processing and thinking. I'm mentally engaged, but maybe not behaviorally engaged. I'm quiet and I'm processing. Maybe reflective. Reflective meaning, this is interesting. I need to think about this more. I need the time to process. Maybe curious. Curious can be activating or not. It can go either way. Maybe it's hopeful. This is really difficult challenge in my life or right now in the workshop, but I have hope that I will figure it out. And I'm working in with myself or with the group to figure it out. It can also be peaceful, serene, calm. It can be at awe. Wow, this idea is so good. This tool is amazing. This insight is really cool. Or this person has has done it so well, or whatever it is. Or maybe simply relaxed. Relaxed usually is not very conducive of learning, but it's a good thing to replenish energy, right? To create some moments which are a bit quieter and relaxation before and after more of intensity. But I would say all in this quadrant are really important to integrate them also in the workshop, because the high energy one, they don't really feed into the introverted process and into the need for deep reflection. And also the high energy ones, sometimes if we keep them there for very long, they will tire out. So they will drain the energy. So we always want to play a bit of that energy, keeping more on the high than not, but then also allowing for spaces to renew and reflect deeper. If we don't, in life in general, if we don't allow enough space for quiet, calm, pleasant emotions, it is likely we will end up in the quite non-pleasant emotions, because our mind and body will have the need to pull back and recharge. So by not creating enough space for this renewal quadrant, we might slip into feeling sad, or feeling impatient as well, or hopeless, or a bit irritable, or maybe lonely, or even resentful. Basically, we didn't have space to recover, and we're pulling back, and we're looking for different way of recovery. So we want to keep in mind to build the workshop with a lot of space, keeping in the turquoise, whatever, blue-green corner, positive emotion, a bit more like moderate intensity, but more activating than not. However, also allowing space for the gray and for the yellow for specific moments. Okay, and the last little bit from the tips and the research, and then I'll see still if there are some questions or comments. I know we could discuss each of them for very long and very deep, but the last one is being aware of how contagious emotions are. I think it was really cool what Giuseppe mentioned before also, like, hey, how about trainer managing their own emotions, thinking about that? Yes, not just for ourselves, but also because it actually translates to the group as well. So emotions are very contagious in sense other people pick it up, and they're contagious from more emotionally expressive person to less emotionally expressive person in that room. That's like a rule of thumb. It's not a hard rule, of course, but that's a rule of thumb. So we want to really keep in mind, trainer, because of their position, has a bit of a spotlight in that sense, and our emotions will impact the rest of the room as well. It also means that people in the group who are more expressive will also spread their vibes in the room, being it positive or negative ones. So we want to keep this in mind in two ways. One, to demonstrate and embody things we want them to feel. So if we want them to be curious, excited, open to mistake, feeling safe, we need to start by also demonstrating that in our behavior, right? And the opposite, beware of things we don't want, and beware that if I have problems, I don't know, with technology, or we are running out of time or something like that, if I build up anxiety out of that, that will also translate. So I want to be beware and aware of what's happening for me right now. I see something in chat. Vesna's idea. Okay, cool. Thank you for right ownership. Okay, cool. So I do want to give you just a moment to think on two questions, and then I'll also see if there are any questions from your side. One is, looking into these 5 tips and taking this into account, what would you maybe change in the flow that you just designed? What would you, maybe nothing, but maybe this gave you some ideas also what you could add more of, emotions from which group, which moderation, and so on. And then also, apart from that, the second question is also, what is one tip or insight or action that you would like to take away from everything we discussed today? And don't think just from the 5 tips, but also think from the intro and the general approach, also from your conversations in the breakouts, and also from the 5 tips. What would you say is one tip or insight or action that you're taking away from today? I will ask you to share your insight or tip in chat. I think it will be useful for others to see, also for me, in terms of knowing what was more sticky for you. So I'll just give you a minute of silence for that, to share what is one thing you're taking away. If you need me to put some slides back, do tell. But what is it one thing that you're taking away from today? And then I'm happy to hear also any questions or comments that you might still have. Maria saying challenge and a slap could be positive as well. Yes, that one often is neglect. I wouldn't say people think it's not welcome, but it's more like we don't even think that it's useful sometimes, right? Cool. Let's hear a few more. And in the meantime, if there are any questions, feel free to unmute. You can also post them in chat or unmute. And I'll read through the sharings in chat at the end. But in the meantime, let's hear also any questions. Slides. Or comments as well, of course. This was, I think, a lot of things in a short time. So I get that more time is needed to process all of it. But if anything still stayed as a confusion, do tell. Cool. I'll check quickly the insights. So challenges are welcome. Tell a story. This is how we take people with us emotionally. Love that, totally. And that story also leads us in that up and down, totally. Okay, Emily says, utilizing more unpleasant emotions like frustration and anger to create motivation, light the fire. Cool. And Giuseppe says, reminder of keeping tab on emotions that they will feel, and it's often not taken into account enough, and the importance of not having them stay on the same level for too long. Okay, the grid with the 4 ones, cool, emotional timeline, how to include more challenging. So my invitation would be not to go over engineer this and overthink, oh, I must control everything and how do everybody feel at each moment, but to really think what is one light way, like what Doug said before, to add a level of this more to your workshop. Just think, what are my tendencies? How is it on average with my workshops? Am I keeping them too intense? Am I not challenging them enough? And how can I add just one more level or tip? Cool. See also from Vesna, we're working with and for people, and emotions are an important part. Cool. Yeah, that in the end, the human element in the room. Cool. Cool. Thank you so much for sticking with me to the end. If you have any more questions, I'll write also my email in chat. Or if you just Google Mirna Trainer's Toolbox, you can also find contact form there and so on. But there is also my email. I'll send you the slides through Stefan, and then also the recording. But feel free to also come back with any questions. Do grab the ebook and check out maybe some more ideas from there. Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mirna, for hosting this first Thought Lab, coming back from summer up north here. We would be happy to host you again sometime soon. We'll share more details as we come closer to that date. As Myrna said, this has been recorded. We'll be cutting it into a nice 1-hour thing. And we'll make sure that all the links and all the materials shared here will be available to everybody on Slack and on the LinkedIn post that will follow this session. Thank you so much and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.